For more on this, we're now joined by economic analyst Dr. Azar Jammine, and he joins us now via our video link. Dr. Azar, thank you so much for your time this evening here in SABC News. I mean, following the 2024 elections, I mean, no political party received an outright majority, and we've seen the move by the ANC to form a national government or government of national unity. When it comes to this move, especially looking at the economic perspective, is this the best solution for South Africa?
I don't know what you mean by best, but it's probably the optimal solution at present, given the constraints that are faced. The business community was very keen on a tie-up between the ANC and the DA. In this situation, it would have had an easy majority and would have been able to pursue investor-friendly policies. But the reality of the situation is that a large proportion of the population is against market-friendly policies and actually are very much against the DA that are seen to be perpetuating so-called white monopoly capitalist policies. And as a consequence, the only way in which the ANC could try and mitigate the situation was to cast its net as widely as possible so that it wouldn't necessarily be identified as siding specifically with the DA. Now, in many ways, that's not the best solution, but given the constraints that we are seeing, it's the optimal solution, I would have thought. And what has favored or a market response since then has been the fact that MK has just not responded to any overtures to join a government of national unity, and the EFF has basically said it will not join a government that contains the DA and the FF plus white minority, perceived white minority parties. So the markets have been gladdened by the fact that this means that the government of national unity will be able to continue to pursue factors that are seen to be vital for stability in the South African economy, such as not favoring nationalization, such as pursuing fiscal austerity that will not allow the public debt to rise too sharply. But the big question, which we quite so rightly pose, is will such a government of national unity really be sufficient to ensure a vast improvement of economic growth in the country? And only time will tell. Yeah. The one very favorable feature is that you're going to have a government that has a lot more parties and some fairly small but outspoken political parties exerting an oversight over the entire governance system in such a way as to limit the extent of corrupt practices to levels way below what we have had in the past. And that's a very positive. We could see significant savings in government spending merely as a consequence of that, and paving the way for an ability to spend on other more important social deliverables.
And speaking about economic growth, I mean, that's what the country's economy needs at the moment. And now that we are moving towards seeing some sort of coalition, especially now with the confirmation this evening from the IFP saying that it really is in talks with the ANC as well as the DA, as well as the NFP. And one would ask, as we are heading towards this direction and seeing an announcement of this nature from the likes of the IFP, how would then the markets react to the latest news we've seen this evening?
Well, quite clear. The markets at the moment are being dominated, and nothing to do with the domestic political situation, but with the decisions and the statements being made in America about the potential for interest rate cuts, or how far they likely to and how quickly they're likely to take place in America. That's what's dominated the markets, and that's what has really driven the rand to much stronger levels. But the backdrop is a favorable one. If ANC IFP DA alliance would be seen to be quite positive for stability in economic policy, whether that stability eventually translates into moves to restructure the economy to enhance economic growth to levels higher than what has been experienced in the past remains to be seen. There are, of course, significant risks with such an alliance, if I could call it. It's not a coalition as yet. And that is that we don't know what the intentions of MK are going to be and how the EFF will respond to being left out of a GNU. And there could be a lot of disruption emanating from that neutralizes some of the stability in economic policy that one would expect to see from the kind of GNU that we're talking about at the moment.
And should we ultimately see this GNU come together, especially focusing on, the various political parties, the likes of the ANC, the DA, as well as the IFP? I mean, what should a government of national unity prioritize to allow for job creation in this country and to also to allow for economic growth?
This is where there are huge fault lines in a potential GNU. And they arise not so much from the DA and the IFP and the ACDP and FF Plus that might join such a GNU and Rise Mzansi. It's more to do with the ANC itself, which is really split apart by those who believe that the way to carry on is through market-oriented policies, and those who would be very tempted to join the MK and the EFF with nationalization, expropriation without compensation, rapid implementation of a national health insurance scheme, introduction of a basic income grant of 1,000 rand for every person in South Africa. And we know that the money there doesn't exist. It's the ANC itself that is torn between the two. And where should the focus lie? I believe the fundamental, South Africa is ideologically completely divided in terms of which is the way to create jobs. On the one hand, you have the business sector that says incorporate the private sector far more actively to find solutions and start investing more heavily and let the private sector run with the economic growth. And on the other side, you've got those who favor government dictating every single step that the economy takes. At the end of the day, though, there are some very fundamental structural weaknesses that are not being properly addressed. The first is to ask yourself, why do we have such high levels of inequality? And one of the answers is because the educational outcomes in the country are just not appropriate. And the second is that the country is dominated by the golden triangle, so to speak, of big government, big business, and strong trade unions. And small business and unemployed and informally employed people are just left out of the mainstream. And none of the big parties really address this. The only people who really start looking at those fundamental smaller microeconomic factors are smaller parties such as Rise Mzansi, BOSA, ACDP, and the like. That is where the real solutions to the economy lie.
And to throw a spanner in the works, Dr. Azar, I mean, at the moment, we know that nothing really is cast in stone when it comes to this GNU. And should we find ourselves, in some sort of an agreement with the likes of the ANC, the MK party, as well as the EFF, and, this coalition or alliance moving towards more the left, what does that mean for our economy?
Well, it was so interesting to see the rand plummeting from close on 18 rand to the dollar to 18 rand 80 to the dollar when the election results initially started coming out, and people saw how well the MK was doing, and the perception was that that may well drive the ANC into forming an alliance with MK, and their kind of economic policies, although they don't have a formal manifesto, are very similar to those of the EFF. So you would have a very leftist, and the markets took a huge knock because they perceived that such an alliance would see the government then abandoning fiscal austerity, the government starting to spend like crazy. And there is this view amongst that left-wing ideology that that is the way to create jobs. Forget all the debt that is seemingly being imposed on us by credit ratings agencies and the IMF, and forget the debt constraint, just go out and spend. And if it increases debt, so be it. The belief is that in the longer run, that will create more economic growth, that will generate more tax revenue and sort out the problem through economic growth brought about by incurring more debt. Now, there is an economic philosophy that would justify that, but only up to a point.
Yeah.
What is the best way of creating wealth for one? It is to borrow money to go and buy a home, see the value of that home improving, and then selling it, and they're going and getting a bigger loan, and building up your wealth that way. But on a national level, that is such a dangerous path to take.
All right, Dr. Azar, thank you so much for your time this evening. That's Dr. Azar Jammine, economic analyst. They're just giving us his insight when it comes to, the possible outcomes of this GNU or the various coalitions, particularly now as negotiations still get underway, and how that will impact the economy.